I speak for everyone on the Simon Foundation in saying that we continue to be thrilled to partner with the Philanthropy Roundtable in the administration of this prize. We all as a family have been coming to this conference every year for so long, life wouldn't be the same without it. My father was one of the founders of what eventually became the Philanthropy Roundtable, and I know he'd be delighted to see us as a family and as the Roundtable progress the way they have for the 26 years. I'd like to take a few moments to say a few words about my father, Bill Simon, who many of you remember from his time as Secretary of the Treasury under Nixon and Ford administrations. He was truly a pioneer. He was our nation's first energy czar. Remember the lines? My mother really gave Dad a hard time about those lines. He took the reins as president of the U.S. Olympic Committee during the tumultuous time following the 1980 boycott, and he subsequently established the U.S. Olympic Foundation with profits from the LA Games in 1984. They were the first games in the United States to turn a profit. He wrote 2 best-selling books that advanced free market ideas that at the time were thought to be radical, and he was also a pathbreaker in the business world in the use of leveraged buyouts as a cutting-edge investment strategy. Yet even with all these accomplishments, the things that remained most important to him were his family and the responsibility of being a good steward of the wealth with which he was blessed. Both, he would say, if done correctly, were among the hardest and most important things a person could do. The purpose of this ceremony is to salute the ideas that Dad carried close to his heart: effective philanthropy and helping people to help themselves. My family and I know Dad would be so happy with our prize winners this year, Pitt and Barbara Hyde. They've helped make Memphis, Tennessee, a national leader in the K-12 education reform, urban park revival, cultural and civic engagement. The Hydes have demonstrated how a locally focused funder can transform his or her hometown through strategic philanthropic leadership. The Hydes and my dad share the belief in targeted funding to projects close to their hearts, the importance of engaging in public policy, and the need to take giving as seriously as the wealth creation itself, if not even more. I was so impressed by the cover story about Pitt and Barbara's philanthropic achievements in the current issue of Philanthropy Roundtables magazine. If you haven't read it yet, you'll find copies outside at the resource table. Please pick one up. To lead us in the conversation with Pitt and Barbara, who I ask you to join me on the stage right now, is Kyle Peterson. He's the executive director of the Walton Family Foundation, and as founder of AutoZone, Pitt was very close to Sam Walton, who was the founder of Walmart and served for many years on the Walmart board. Sam's late son, John Walton, was actually the first recipient of this very prize in 2001. So I'm glad to celebrate that connection and all the progress that has been made in school choice and education reform since then, in no small part due to the Hyde's leadership in Tennessee. We are all about to learn a lot from these thoughtful philanthropists, and I ask you to please join me in welcoming Pitt, Barbara, and Kyle. Thank you. Kyle, thank you. Nice to see you. Thanks, Barbara.
Well, good afternoon. Great to see everybody. My name is Kyle Peterson, and I am the new executive director of the Walton Family Foundation. As I tell people, I've got the best job in the world. And I think there's probably many people in this room who would argue with me, but aren't we all lucky to be working in this tremendous field? And I have a great day here. What a treat What an absolute treat to have a conversation with these two heroes of philanthropy. And I think everybody is excited about this because we go to various conferences, we listen to panels, but rarely do we ever really get to sit down with two people like Pitt and Barbara Hyde, who are the winners of this year's William E. Simon Prize for Philanthropic Leadership, to get real with them and to listen to stories about what they've done and really what makes them tick. I think everybody here is going to learn a lot here in the next couple of minutes. I'm going to introduce them very quickly. You all know who they are, right? They have been incredible contributors over the years. But it is important to take a step back and just hear a few of these things. Then we're going to get into some questions, all right? So, but I also should mention that big hello from Alice Walton, who is a dear friend of Pitt and Barbara, and she wanted to make sure that she extended her great gratitude and honoring you, both of you, for what you've done in the past, as well as the entire Walton family is very excited. Great connections, which we'll talk about, between Barbara and Pitt and the Walton family. So first there's Pitt. Memphis born. Not even before he turned 30, this gentleman was leading one of the largest wholesalers in the South. An incredible, imagine, when I was 28 years old, I could barely even kind of show up for work, but this gentleman here was leading a huge company. And about this time, Pitt came to know Sam Walton, and he became a member of the Walton board. And actually, my office is about a block away from the Walmart Museum, and there's actually pictures there, which I've seen. So your participation. Then came Auto Shack, which became, AutoZone, and that's, really just half the story. It's an incredible story. It's half the story. There's his belief in humanity, stemming from Martin Luther King's assassination, which led to the National Civil Rights Museum, Pitt's first major project. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. There's Barbara, who is a native of Atlanta and has great affection for her alma mater, UNC. And it was a fundraising trip that brought Barbara and Pitt together. And I think it's interesting to hear about that story because everything I've heard about you, Barbara, that you are the great collaborator. You understand if you want to get something done, none of us in this room alone have the wherewithal, the smarts, whatever, to actually get it done. So you bring together people and ideas, which is a great tribute to philanthropy. So again, welcome and congratulations on this year's William E. Simon Prize. Let's jump into questions. So I think most of the folks in this room know that the Hyde Family Foundations focus on 3 areas, and they're quite similar to the Walton Family Foundation. One is transforming education. The second is positioning authentic assets, and the third is creating livable communities. One question is, what's the story behind these 3 themes? There's always got to be a story. You could have done 5 things, first of all, but why these 3?
With us, very much like the Simon Foundation, we're firm believers that the hardest thing in the world is to give anyone anything and have them be better for it. And so our focus has to be on how do we empower people to be able to solve their own problems. And of course, education, start with K through 12 education, is nothing more empowers an individual than being educated, particularly a child that is coming from a impoverished family, usually a single parent, mother, and you can transform their whole lives. And we originally demonstrated, just like y'all focused at the Walmart, on charter schools to demonstrate that you could educate kids from the poorest background. So education was the most obvious, and of course Memphis, we chose to focus on Memphis because it was an urban center that was big enough where it had all the same problems and opportunities as any urban market. And of course, having a large low-income population, we felt like we could demonstrate we could turn education around in that environment. Not only would it be a transformative for our city, but maybe ultimately it could serve as a model for the country. And of course, the critical assets is looking for those things that we can do within the community to enhance the quality of life for all the citizens. And then you get into, you know, transforming neighborhoods and our greening initiatives and those. So we thought those were obvious areas that would have the greatest impact on the quality of life for the greatest number of citizens in our city.
So I'm wondering, over the years, have you ever contemplated adding on a fourth, fifth area of focus? I mean, you've held steady to these areas.
Well, it's been tempting. I mean, as all of you in the room know, there are no shortage of extraordinary things that we could all support. But I think we have, with the help of an incredible staff and watching the example of a lot of people in this room, I mean, we've tried to be disciplined about it. We're not a huge foundation. And so trying to stay focused. And, you know, the problems that we're focusing on, things like reforming K-12 public schools, these are very, very complex, complicated problems. They require us to stay the course. So we can't kind of decide there's a new shiny bauble over there that we need to chase after when we get frustrated with the inevitable setbacks in ed reform, for example. So we've tried to stay disciplined.
So maybe within these three areas, if you could tell us a story, what's your proudest moment, which I know is a really, really tough question, because I'm sure there are many, but what's your proudest moment in building these three areas and working with the community?
I would have to say the Civil Rights Museum, which of course was one of the earliest projects where we really rolled up our sleeves. You know, when the assassination of King occurred in '68, it was devastating to the country, and it was particularly devastating for Memphis. And so, and of course, there was a lot of movement in the city to want to tear down the site, the motel, Lorraine Motel, and just try to erase it from all memory. But we felt that it was very important to take this tragic site and turn it into something positive for our city and for the country, and to have it as a place where we could recognize the heroes and heroines of the civil rights movement. And of course, you know, it was a very tough project because, you know, being affluent white people taking on, even though we had the best of intentions and we're really putting our time, energy, and capital into this thing, it was still, we got huge kickback and a lot of very negative press all the time about, you know, what are you doing, messing with our museum and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, we knew it was the right thing to do, and it was a very important thing for healing our community and to really take us forward in our relationships. And of course, right after we reopened the museum, we also started the Freedom Awards, where we recognize the national and international people that are carrying on the cause for individual rights in this country and worldwide. And so it was a great way to really re-engage everybody in the subject of the importance of not only civil rights, but developing relationships throughout our community.
And was there a particular approach you took to that? Because that is, that's a sensitive subject, obviously, in this community. And, you know, other philanthropists, frankly, would not touch that, you know. But I'm curious, what did you learn from the way you approached that? And tell us a little bit about how you worked with community leaders to actually get this done.
It was, you know, I mean, again, it was engaging people and having meaningful conversations about how we take this forward, how we build a really civil community within our city, and start rebuilding the bridges that got destroyed in this tragic incident. And but again, like everything, I mean, you had to take a very long view, because you know you're going to take all kind of errors in this process. But at the end of the day, why I'm so proud of it is because today everybody looks at the museum as a huge treasure, and you know any meetings or banquets as a whole are really hugely supported by the whole community. So I feel so good that that I persevered. Both of us persevered through this, and it turned out to be the right thing to do. That's the greatest reward you can have, is to have that kind of resolution over time.
So, to your point, philanthropy is hard to do. Can you share a low moment? Now, this is a celebration, but I think it's, again, getting real. Like, what's a low moment where you had to really persevere?
Well, using that as an example, I had, for months on end, I had an ongoing campaign run against us, in the press and on TV and everything else. And, that can be very, demoralizing. And with most, people, particularly, Caucasians, is to be called a racist in the media and everything else is pretty unnerving, So it was an ultimate test. But again, I think what you find is if you're convinced you're doing the right thing and it's for a good cause, ultimately you can prevail. But you got to really be in there and work it hard and stay the course.
Say that again.
I just sort of quietly said, Pitt won't brag on himself, but I have always been so inspired that that's an example of how he's kept his eyes on the prize, to use a phrase from the civil rights movement. And we've had moments of having Nelson Mandela at the Civil Rights Museum and Desmond Tutu, and them talking about this sacred ground now, and so that's been very uplifting. Kyle, I'm just around low points, could I add another one? Just thinking about the work that many of you all do in this room around education reform, and we've had some high points in Memphis. We're thrilled when we got a $90 million grant from the Gates Foundation some years ago, and then that led to Tennessee being the first of 2 states to win Race to the Top. We've seen, really significant student achievement gains. The challenge, and maybe there are regular low moments in that work, because even though we've expanded choice in Memphis, we've got 67, 70 charter schools in Memphis now doing incredible work, we still regularly see even schools with stronger teachers, Teach for America, strong principals trained by new leaders, we still see that the gains aren't happening quickly enough. And that there are still a generation of young people who aren't on a fast enough trajectory, and that can be challenging. And yet at the same time, every year we get to see these graduations that occur, and kids who are college bound, who never would have been college bound before, where the trajectory of their lives are being changed. So, I always think about how the education reform work is a kind of grueling but also really rewarding and long journey.
Well, let's get into that, because it's interesting. I was in a conversation with somebody, another philanthropic leader, the other day, and wondering really, at the end of the day, what is the gift? Resources matter a lot, but in this instance, there's something about the pure persistence that you do not let go, and you would have every right to let go and move on to something else that might be just, with less obstacles. but there is some gift that you are giving in terms of determination, which other people watch, and then you ennoble other people, particularly when it comes to education. So I just think that's striking for the two of you when it comes to this persistence. Let's talk about education, and if you can tell us a little bit about the advocacy component of this, and when you were instrumental in helping to pass the state's charter law, which I know, again, that's probably a story in determination, right? Grit, pure grit. Tell us a bit about that, and why is that so important? Because there's other people here who are probably undergoing this right now.
Yeah. It was critical because, we had for years been trying to work from the top with the district. And of course, that was like beating your head against the wall. So finally, we came to the realization that, we need to set an example. We need a model where we can show that we can take kids from the most impoverished background and change the course of their lives. And of course, charters were the only answer to go, but the challenge was, how do we pass the law? And you talk about a grueling process. I mean, for 5 years, every legislative session, I'd go up there and I'd walk the halls and I'd meet with every legislator. And at that point, the Democrats controlled the vast majority of the House and the legislature. And of course, the teachers union controlled the Democratic Party in Tennessee. So it was just this exercise in futility, but finally, we just chipped away and we'd win, one person at a time. And, it just, it finally, an interesting story is that the Speaker pro tem in the House, we had been for a couple of years, we'd gotten in the education subcommittee, we'd gotten to a tie each time, which meant we lose, And so Barbara and I were having lunch with Lois DeBerry, this great African-American woman who was the key role in the House. And so we were talking to her about the charters and all. Finally, she said, well, in my head, I know it's a dumb thing to do from a political point of view to be for this because the Democrats will run a candidate against me. But in my heart, I can't stand to see another generation of my kids go down the drain. So what finally happened is we were deadlocked again at the 12th hour in the legislature, and in walked Lois DeBerry, who technically, under the House rules, she could vote on any piece of legislation. But by practice and precedent, it had never been done before. She walked in and cast the deciding vote. But we had been meeting with her for 5 years, and finally we won her over. And it was a long, drawn out process.
Sweating just hearing the story.
Yeah, right, yeah.
We've also, I think we've also gotten smarter about our advocacy work over time, and Pitt's story demonstrates his willingness to be hands-on and bring his years of business credibility to the table. But we've also learned to step back a little bit sometimes and invest in groups, parent groups, groups of young advocates, groups with leadership of color especially, to take this on. So it's not always rich white people standing around trying to tell everybody what's good for them. And so we've, I guess, diversified our portfolio of advocacy investments, and it's exciting. It's so encouraging, even though there are always setbacks. It's so encouraging to see these young leaders. I'm sure every one of you in your community knows, TFA core members who go on to have leadership roles, who serve on school boards, who take on advocacy things, and to see them, taking the reins and running with it. So we've been excited to see that.
I think the thing we do that most foundations don't tend to do is that we engage ourselves. We believe the sweat equity is far more valuable than the capital. And it means you got to get to know every bureaucrat, every politician, and you just got to work it. And also, obviously not through the foundation, but through other funds, you got to recruit and support the right candidates for school board and other key offices on the city council and everything else. So, I mean, it's a full court press. And, you know, it just, but to me, you know, looking at it from a business point of view, the thing that I saw as an opportunity is, you know, the money we have to give in our foundation, like a drop in the ocean. The budget of the Memphis school system is $1 billion a year, you know. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, here they got $1 billion in capital and they got all this human capital. And so it's not lack of capital or people, it's the productivity of that capital and people. And if we could, even on the margin, change the productivity of that capital, we could have a huge multiplier effect. And eventually that's what we did. We went from a system like everywhere else in the country where the teachers union pretty well wrote the ticket, it was lifetime tenure, no accountability and all that. Whereas today, we can hold people accountable for student outcomes, they're evaluated based on performance, and they're compensated based on their performance, and we can hire and fire people. I mean, the only way anybody ever got fired in the system before we changed the rules was if they committed a felony. I mean, nobody got fired for lack of performance, you know? So, I mean, it's just, again, it's a long slog, but it can be so rewarding at the end. And of course, today, Tennessee is the fastest improving state in the country.
Fantastic.
We still have a long way to go, but at least we're on a trend line that is good.
Barbara, I'd love to come back to what you mentioned, because I think this is something I see across the K-12 reform movement, which is this a bit of a tension, not so much tension, but there's choices here. Do you focus on creating seats? And do you focus on some things that will provide that sustainability, which is the parent advocacy, which is so needed, but that may not get you what you need to help a kid today. That may pay off 3 years from now, 10 years from now. And that difficult choice with, you know, finite dollars of where to put your money, you can bring another school, right, with that. So just talk to us a little bit about what you talk about when it comes to these really, really tough choices.
They're very tough trade-offs, and I mean, I don't know that any of us would say we're getting the balance right, but we've tried to invest in a bit of all of it. I mean, in creating options, creating seats in high-performing schools for kids, also in investing in the human capital pipeline that's going to support those schools and going to provide teachers and great leaders across different governance types within the charter sector, within the public schools, within the Catholic schools. We've tried to be agnostic about school models and focus rigorously on high-performing models. You know, and we try to have a feedback loop that we look at that helps us adjust our investments. I don't know if I've really answered your question, but
There's a balance that you need to strike at the end of the day.
and be willing to look at where your investments may not be yielding the return that they should be, and adjust as you go along. And we've also worked hard in Memphis. I mean, Memphis, as many of you probably know, is not a very wealthy community. And so we've tried to work hard to build alignment with a handful of other big funders, because we can't do it all on our own, and trying to create ways to invite other people to the table. And maybe my old career as a fundraiser comes in handy then, trying to get others to step up and invest, and maybe learn from what our lessons.
So maybe this is a good segue to tell us a bit about the Memphis Education Fund.
So a few years ago, we realized that we understood the idea of investing in these multiple strategies in charter schools, in human capital things like Teach for America and New Leaders, in advocacy. But a lot of people who weren't spending as much time with the work were like, well, I don't understand how all these pieces work. I get hit up all the time. You know, how do I decide where to invest? And so we created initially, it was sort of Teacher Town was the moniker for it, which was the idea of making Memphis a place where great teachers want to be and know they can make a difference. And that's morphed into something called the Memphis Education Fund, which was designed by, you know, several of us as major funders, where we tried to clarify what's the story, what are the building blocks that really move a whole city forward from an education reform point of view, and give people an opportunity to invest in those.
Yeah, and I mean, it was really, that capital was focused on, bringing on, supporting charters, supporting reform efforts. Like, one thing, we've always done, unlike most funders, is we never gave up on the district as a whole. So we worked with the district as well as the charter school sector. And of course, one of the results of that is today they have what they call the AutoZone, which is their model of charters, where they give the principals total autonomy like a charter within their system. And of course, they have gotten much improved results, but they assign their best teachers, their best principals, which is great because it's the lowest performing schools. So it's been very helpful. And I think, also the pipeline, teacher pipeline, is where we, as we all know, one big problem is the teaching colleges in the United States typically do not draw from the best students in the student body, quite the contrary from the bottom, and they teach to the old failed system rather than a reform urban agenda. So a big focus of that effort too is on the pipeline, along then with the advocacy. And one thing that really does my heart good is all those early years, every time we try to do something with the school board, the union would pack the room with all of their advocates, Well, we finally got it to where now, like an organization called LIFT that we supported, which is a parent organization. Now we're packing the, meeting room with parents advocating for reform and better outcome for kids. So, again, you've got to play all of these cards to be successful in this game.
I want to turn to authentic assets in a minute, but just, listening to you, I'm sure what's on the mind of many people in the room is, your level of engagement. It's clear that your level of engagement is extraordinarily high. It's, again, similar to the Walton Family Foundation, and the family's very involved. Talk to us a little bit about how you engage and learn, but also make sure that you, as you mentioned, you've got a tremendous staff. Like, how do you do that, where staff is involved and you're giving them the independence, but you want to get involved, and clearly you have been. So how do you actually manage that?
Well, at one level, the answer would be that we try to do what good trustees do. We try to be clear about a vision for the foundation, try to take the sort of the 100,000-foot view, and then put a great staff in place. The truth is we have a great staff in place. Teresa Sloyan is the director of our foundation. She's going to hate that I'm saying this, but we do what Teresa says pretty much. But, well, I mean, we really feel that we're partners in the work, and we don't just parachute in 2 or 3 times a year for trustee meetings. We're living this every day, and Pitt is bringing to the work, all of the knowledge of a long and distinguished business career. For me, it's my passion to have been in the nonprofit sector all my life and to be able to try to make an impact as a grant maker. I always say, it's every fundraiser's dream to get to be a grant maker, but I've realized that to do it well, to do it in a way that really has impact is really, really hard and requires being full-time.
Did you want to add anything, Pitt?
Well, I think, again, all of those things are, it's not, there's no silver bullet in this public policy thing. It's so multifaceted, and, you got to have people on your staff and leading your staff that are just as committed as we are. And of course, Teresa, we're so fortunate to have her as head of our operating our foundation, and she's brought on great people, and we're all, totally committed to, because they're such important causes, and they're so critical, not only to the success of our city, but I firmly believe that a liberal democracy cannot prevail if we have a permanent 25-30% underclass. And the only way to work our way out of that situation is to give our kids a quality education.
Thank you. Well, let's turn to, your beautiful city here. And I've been to Memphis. I'm sure many people in the room have been to Memphis. It really is a sight. Gorgeous city with the Mississippi River there. You got beautiful museums and parks and all sorts of natural assets, which you have, supported, which is just striking. Talk to us about what you're proud of. So you talked to us a little bit about the Civil Rights Museum for sure, but when it comes to some of these other contributions, I'd love to hear what you're proud of.
Sure. Well, I think one of our peak investments recently has been in a big investment in something called Shelby Farms Park, and a green line that connects the park with downtown, and now is going to go across the bridge. And so Shelby Farms is a 4,500 acre park, 5 times the size of Central Park, that was essentially laying fallows owned by the county. And Pitt was the brilliant mind that saw that as an untapped, underutilized asset. And there had been arguments over time about splitting it up, selling it off, retiring county debt by selling property, developing. And so we got involved, probably it was around 2007 that we got involved in the civic debate over what should happen. And try to fast forward here, but basically through a lot of years we were able to learn from Central Park Conservancy, create a management agreement with the county to privatize the management of the asset, put it in a long-term conservancy. We got the public engaged in a big sort of design competition to imagine what could happen with some development of the park, and hired a national firm, James Corner Field Operations, who did the High Line in New York. They did a master plan. We raised $70 million, which probably for some of you in some bigger cities doesn't sound like a lot. In Memphis, that was a heavy lift. And we started in right before 2008, so the lift got heavier. But we kept at it again. And so fast forward to September a year ago, when the park was kind of reopened after several major $70 million worth of investing in the heart of the park, a new lake, some facilities being built to drive revenue, and knitting trails together. And it's a really, it's a jewel. And the fun for us now, we talked about how hard education reform is, and this is a tangible asset that the community now has embraced. And it puts a smile on our face, really almost daily we go use it, and usually weekly. And it's like the United Nations out there now. It's a rainbow of human beings enjoying something. And I guess one other lesson we learned is that if you take a project like that that's tangible, that the community loves, and set the bar high, from a design point of view, from an investment point of view, from a public engagement point of view. I think we and others who joined us in it showed Memphis what Memphis can do. And so now there's a different level of thinking about renaissance on the riverfront, for example. So that's been a great project.
I mean, the one thing about this one was fun. This was fun. It was the first major project we've ever done where we didn't have people out there taking shots at us, you know. This was like motherhood and apple pie, you know. I thought, finally, Lord, you know, we got one that everybody enjoys and everybody embraces. And of course, along with the park, as she mentioned, you know, Memphis went from the most bike-unfriendly city in the country to, you know, recently being recognized as one of the best, because we've been able to connect this park with, you know, over 250 miles of various trails and all. And as Barbara said, now you can go from right across the Mississippi River on this thing. So it's yeah, this has not only been great for Memphis, but it's been a hell of a lot of fun for us.
So is this Shelby Farm, was it many years ago a penal institution?
Yeah.
That is amazing.
That's how originally why that many acres were there. It was a very reformed penal institution originally, because it was where the inmates, you know, they produced enough to support it. They learned trades. They did all that. So it was a very recognized place, and that's how it stayed there for all those years. And then as the nature of it changed, you know, it fell out of usage, and it just kind of sat there. And you know, every 5 years or so, some developer would come up with some brilliant idea about taking a big bite out of the park. So that's, you know, and to me, you know, looking for things that can change people's lifestyles and change people's enthusiasm for your community. I mean, you know, this has been a home run, and it's just, you know, it's been transformative.
And it sounds like, I don't know where it is on this map perhaps, but you may have another home run coming, and that's with the new medical district and the Riverfront Museum that you're thinking about. Maybe you should talk about this prize and how this prize fits into that.
Right. Well, the Memphis right now, we of course we work for many cities. Our downtown was really dead for a great number of years, but we've worked hard to turn it around. In fact, you know, I guess 25 years ago, I opened the AutoZone headquarters on the bluff of the Mississippi River. First new building had been down there in 20 years, in hopes of stimulating the redevelopment. And fortunately, it's really taken off, and now downtown is the hottest real estate in the city. Meanwhile, we've got a very vibrant midtown, and between them is our medical district, which, you know, it's ironic that it's very viable in that the 7 major institutions from St. Jude to all the hospitals and other institutions are thriving, and it's 17,000 employees and growing, you know, but it's like a wasteland. People drive to work, get in their cars and leave, and so the goal there was to transform the area where it's not only a work, but it's a live, work, play. And we got set up a fund that the 7 major institutions invested in. We, you know, did the initial funding to, you know, from a philanthropy point of view, and now we've brought in other philanthropic people in the mix. And so we think in 5 years we'll be able to totally transform, where it'll be a seamless experience from downtown to midtown, and the medical district, you know, will be thriving on all fronts. So again, it's that transforming neighborhoods, except this one is on a much bigger scale.
I mentioned the riverfront, Brooks.
Oh yeah, the riverfront. Well, you know, I sort of equate the riverfront and the Brooks Museum thing to what we learned at Shelby Farms, because strangely enough, we're sitting there and all this land down there is owned by the city. So unlike most cities that have tried to, you know, rework their riverfront, they had to acquire so much land. Well, it's been sitting there, and of course the city over the years in its wisdom put here on these magnificent bluffs overlooking the river, they put parking garages, fire stations, you know, all this brilliant stuff. But the good news is we got it sitting there. And so we started on, we could see this as like another Shelby Farms, which you could reconnect the downtown with the riverfront. And along the way, there was one of the bluffs. Meanwhile, Barbara's on the board of the Brooks Museum of Art, and they were looking at expanding, and really it didn't make sense to expand where they are. So we're now have launched this project. And of course, that part of that was inspired by Alice and what she did in Crystal Bridges, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's been so remarkable to see how she has transformed that whole area with that museum and the kind of traffic she gets. So I can see not only moving to this dramatic site, but all of a sudden be a tourist magnet like she's done, and it changes the whole scope of things. And of course, right on the street, you know, we have the Civil Rights Museum that's getting 300,000 visitors a year, you know, like 4 blocks down. And meanwhile, the Brooks in their present location, which is a beautiful location, but they get 60,000, mainly just people in the area. So I see it, and it also can be the gateway for the whole riverfront project. So, you know, again, we see this as, you know, raising the bar and taking underutilized assets and transforming them into something that will change people's lifestyles.
So, so when we were so thrilled and honored to be given this wonderful Simon Prize, and knowing especially that pretty much everybody in this room deserves a similar prize, as you all know, it comes with a very generous grant from the Simon Foundation, and you know, it's a little like choosing your favorite child to decide who of all the things we've invested in will get the benefit of the Simon Prize. But we've decided, since this new Brooks Museum Riverfront project is kind of our next big bet, that we're going to use that to help seed some of the initial consultation and design around this project. So we're very, very grateful to the Simon family and the Simon Foundation for that. Thank you.
It's terrific. Can we ask just one more question?
Please.
One more question. So what advice do you have for folks out here? Now, which I know is tough, but you know, whether they've been in it for a long time or they're new to it like me, what advice do you have after all this, these, you know, great successes you've had?
Well, I'll start and I'll be short. Stick with it. Find the joy that keeps you at it, and invite lots of others into the work with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think perseverance is key to this, in selecting the things in your community that you think can have the greatest impact on the quality of life of the citizens in your community.
Well, thank you. Well, let's give a round of applause to Pitt and Barbara Hyde.
Thank you.